when we talk about this, when we talk about that first part, when we say, our Father and art in heaven, we kind of have to we got to talk about the beginning of prayer or the why of prayer. And I think there's a couple of different problems is not the right words, concerns that many of us have, including myself. And I think the first kind of concern that many of us have is the laundry list, folks. Do any of you pray like this? I kind of tend to, every now and then. You got your laundry list of things that you bring to God, right? God heal me, God give me a job, God heal my friends, bless me with abundance, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on, right? And it's not bad to ask God for stuff. Like that's good, in fact. It's good to lean on Him whenever you need anything, to never think that you have to feel ashamed to ask for something. However, I think there's some enjoyment. However, when you're talking to somebody, do you enjoy talking to the person that is just constantly asking you for things? Like many of you have had 3-year-olds at some point in time, right? At some point, you grow tired of the why, right? I want a cookie, I want this, I want that, right? Like that's, and your spouse comes home from somewhere and he's like, I just want to have an adult conversation, right? Like that's, like that because that little one just wants nothing from you. It's not a conversation. And so I think that's kind of for the list takers, Jesus desires for your prayers to be richer. And the Lord's Prayer can help out with that. And then the other concern that I hear, and I hear this quite a bit. I think this I talk about it a lot, like things like this a lot, because I think it was my most surprising part about being in kind of church work and the pastor stuff that I've been in for the last 15 years. That it's the people who don't feel worthy. The people who don't feel like they're good enough, right? That they're like, oh, God wouldn't listen to my prayer. And I've mentioned this before, and I've been here, a year and a half? We're coming up on 2 years. In October, it'll be 2 years. And I've been here in a year and a half, and I've already heard it from, 5 people that said if I would walk into the church, the whole place would cave in on itself, right? You've heard this before. That's something like, yeah, they're making jokes and it would all collapse. But there's a reality underneath that a lot of people feel. And they're like, I'm not good enough. And when they feel that, when they're over there, that can impact how they view God hears their prayers, right? That can impact because it can feel kind of disjointed. An example of this was I was at a pastor's conference in Orlando. This is probably about a year ago now. But I was at a pastor's conference in Orlando, and I was sitting at a restaurant with about 8 other pastors. And you got to understand, the job of pastor attracts a certain type of individual. Notice how I am the one talking and everyone's listening right now. It attracts that type of individual, right? Someone, like, one of my goals when I'm at a table with people is to be the loudest person at the table. It's not my goal, it's just my spiritual gift, all right? Now, what happens when you have 8 of these guys that have that spiritual gift? We're usually the loudest table in the room. So it's just these, it's just guys that are extroverted and, all that stuff. And then one of the guys that's sitting there, he goes, that's Lou Holtz. Now, do you guys know who Lou Holtz is? I have no idea. I don't care about football. But I was like, who's that? I don't care. Like, that's over there. And apparently it was like the football coach for Notre Dame, like back when Notre Dame was awesome. And so, like, that's Lou Holtz. And he went in, and they could see him. We could all see him over there in the corner. And they're like, you should get up and talk to Lou Holtz. And then all of a sudden, all these super extroverted people that would go up and talk to the wall if you gave them the opportunity, right? Suddenly, like, oh, I'm not worthy to talk to Lou Holtz, right? Like, I'm not worthy. I didn't care. I don't care about football. But that's, they're just like, I'm not worthy. And then one of the guys is like, I got to go to the bathroom. And we're all like, oh, someone's going to go talk to Lou Holtz, right? And he goes out and he's gone for a while. He comes back. It's like, did you talk to Lou Holtz? And he goes, I walked by the table, but I kept on walking. Like, that's like it was like that bold move type of thing. And he's going in there. And I think a lot of times that same emotion can creep into some of our prayer lives too, where it's like, I'm just not worthy to ask this. I'm not good enough. I got some manner of sin in my life. I've done something. I haven't left the most righteous life or something. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it can get in our way. And so as we begin this sermon, Jesus wants us to pray richer prayers, deeper prayers than just the list. And also he wants us to come fearless to the Father. He wants us to come fearless in saying that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it begins with our Father. Our Father. It begins in that way of beginning with our Father, because it's this closeness with this Father language. Now we got to get a conversation out of the way when we talk about Father. Some of you don't have the best relationship with your father. And it's hard for you to understand God as your father. I get that. Yeah, like that's fine. And if you have to just substitute in Father for something else to get by it because you have all kinds of just issues with that because of your father wasn't the best, that's fine. But what I want you to kind of understand is that when we say Father, the way we're using it is if the Father was perfect, right? It was like the archetype. It was the perfect Father and its closeness. And I think when we're talking about that, we've got to talk about Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. As we're talking about Father and what it means and what's going on, you got to talk about that parable of the prodigal son. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of this because I think our two ideas behind it, behind the list maker and the one that doesn't feel like they're worthy, I think you have both of those represented in this prodigal son here. So when I think of the prodigal son story, I immediately think of the first one, right? In fact, that was kind of all I thought of for the longest time. Like that's, when I was young, the prodigal son story was all about that younger son, how he goes off and is bad and stuff like that, but the father always accepts him back, right? And then that's the end of the story, right? Like that's all there is. We could have probably stopped reading. I could have stopped reading the gospel lesson at the end when the father throws the big party for the younger son, and no one would have missed the end chunk of it, right? Like we don't really think of that older son much. So I immediately think of the younger one. But this prodigal son story is great. It's a reason why it's a favorite, because its depth level is huge. So the younger one, just to kind of, for those of you who don't know the story, we'll just kind of go back in it just for a second here. So the younger son asks for his inheritance, which basically meant, Father, like, I kind of wish you were dead to me. Give me everything that is as if you were dead. And so his father listens to him, gives it to him, and so he goes off on his own way. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like that one person that feels unworthy, right? The one person that isn't close to God. That sounds like that person who doesn't feel like they're close to the Heavenly Father. Because that younger son obviously wasn't close to his father. He's like doesn't care about him, right? And he goes off and he asks for his inheritance early, goes out, lives a wild life or whatever it is, spends everything, and then all of a sudden a famine hits, and he's squandered everything, and he squandered everything he has, and he's now working on a pig farm, and he's starving from the poverty so much that he's longing to eat the gross slop mess that they're feeding the pigs, right? So he's over there, and then all of a sudden he gets an idea. And he's like, I could go back to my father's house. I could go back to the father. But does he actually want to go back to the father? No, not really. Not really. What move does he make? What move does he make? He doesn't want to do that. He's just like, my father's slaves are treated better than I'm treated right now. I will go back and I won't become a slave. I won't become a son. I'll just become a slave again because that's all I'm worth. And this is what he says in Luke 15, verse 18. He's not talking to his father yet. He's rehearsing what he's going to say. He goes, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your servants. You know, he's gone away from his father, both physically and mentally. Like he's nowhere near his father now. And now he's destitute, doesn't have anything. He's like, well, if I could just be a slave, right? I've talked to so many people that are worried about that. They're worried about their praying. They're worried that God won't even listen to them. They're ashamed of the things that they've done. And they end up making weird deals with God because of it. They end up making stuff like, well, if I'll just come to church, but I won't be in any kind of leadership role, or I won't do this, I won't do that, all that stuff, and I'll still give a little bit. I'm just thankful that I can be kind of on the peripheral of you, God. But they never allow themselves to fully come back. To come back because they feel like there's some kind of guilt, something behind them that God doesn't want them there. But you guys know the prodigal son story. Many of you do. So I can just imagine that son walking back. He's walking back. He's rehearsing this line. Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. You know, like I need to be a slave, not a son. And then he sees him, and he's probably far off, and all of a sudden he sees the father running out to him, and you know he's probably like, oh no, it's like, I want to be a slave, not a son, slave, not a son, slave, not, and then all of a sudden the father just grabs him, right? Grabs him and does a huge bear hug. And I'm sure the son is still like, I need to be a slave, not a son, a slave, not a son, you know, like all that stuff. And the father's like, don't listen to any of that. He's like, put the best coat on him, put a ring on him, we're throwing a party. Get the very best steaks, right? That's what they called lamb back then, good steaks. That's what it was. So like we're having a huge party, and he throws this massive party. And the cool thing about that is that the father ran out there not to claim another servant, but he ran out there to claim a son. And if you feel like God won't listen to your prayers, or you feel like you just can't be close to him, you've never had that mountaintop spiritual experience that, you know, whoever has had two seats down from you, and you're just like, I don't know, I just don't feel it. Know that God is bringing you in not as a slave, but as a son. And Jesus is encouraging us to pray like that, to pray fearlessly, to come back in and all of that. So we got the younger son at the party. God has claimed him as a son, right? The father has claimed him as a son, but we still have a problem. Where's the older son? Do you guys know? He's not in the party, right? He's not in the party. He's outside. And so the father goes outside to find him, and he finds the older son, and that son is hot and angry, and just is just spitting venom out of his mouth, right? Like he's so angry. And the father talks to him, and that other son immediately points a finger right at the father and angrily yells at him. And he's like, listen, I've been here all these years and I've served you. I've never disobeyed you. I listened to everything you said. I cleaned out all those barns and what those animals do to them, right? All that stuff. I cleaned out all that stuff. And like, you never gave me anything that I may celebrate even just a little bit with a goat. You haven't given me anything. But when this son of yours who wasted everything on prostitutes, notice that's the first time it said prostitute. That was an accusation. That's never in the story. And he immediately goes to the worst. When that son of yours, he's not even saying my brother, and that son of yours wastes everything, you throw the biggest party in the county for him. Notice something. That son, is he allowed in the party? Why isn't he going in the party? It's because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to go in the party. It's because he's got this list. Did you notice his list? He's obeyed everything. He hasn't squandered anything. He's been super responsible. He goes to church. Oh, maybe we're talking about something else too. He goes to church every week. You know, he's prayed at all the right meetings. He's done everything right. Why isn't he getting what he's deserved? Right? See that? See that? Like, he hasn't squandered anything. And this is what my concern is. And the reason why it's my concern is because this is the son that I fall into. Right? Is that this is me. Listen, I'm a pastor. I'm the one everyone's like, well, if you could be like Chris, you know, you'd be such a better person when they're talking to their own kids. That's true. But there's a certain level of that. You know, you go around to people who are Christians and you're like, I'm a pastor. They're like, oh, that's great. You can get a lot of praise in this job. Right? Like you can get a lot of that stuff. And it can affect me when I don't get the same rewards that my other brother pastors are getting. Well, it's like, well, why isn't this church growing? You know? Have I not been as good? Have I not had the list? And hopefully you're putting yourself in this list too. That sometimes we get this list in our minds of like, God, I did all these things. I faithfully prayed for all this stuff. And I haven't gotten anything out of it. And we end up angry. We end up angry, outside, and alone. And that's the problem, is when we feel like we're owed something, we end up angry outside and alone in the outside of the party. Like that we end up outside and we're outside and alone and angry. Why? Because we put ourselves out there, right? We're not in the party. The party is going on right in there, and I'm just going to have my pity party outside here, right? Because we feel like, and that's my concern. And that's what I see with a lot of folks over the years, that they get angry. Now, what does the father say to him? He goes, son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Son, you are always with me, and everything that I have is yours. The Father just wants you. He just wants you. And what we end up finding out is that this story isn't so much about the lost son and the good son, but this story is about a father who has two unfaithful sons. Just one was around the whole time. just refuses to come to the party. And here's a little thing that you can understand when you're trying to understand my sermons and all that stuff. If you understand the kingdom of God is like a party, you'll understand what I'm talking about a little bit more. Because I think sometimes we're like, the kingdom of God looks like a stodgy church service where we're singing hymns all day. Maybe that'll be a component on Sundays. But it's like a party of new creation. And you know what? This same idea of not being called a slave, but be called a son, coming to the party, is what Paul is talking about in Galatians chapter 4. When he says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son. And then he explains how the son happened, like born of a woman, born of the law, redeemed those who are under the law so that they might receive adoption as sons. But, we'll say this, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son. And because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of his sons into our hearts, calling Abba, Father. Calling Abba is kind of like daddy. Calling like this close, personal. It's not, oh, I will come back to God and be a slave, but it's the Spirit of God coming to all of us, calling a closeness to the Father. Because you are no longer a slave, but a son. So the Spirit of God is coming to all of us, crying out, Abba, Father. And God is beckoning us to come in to the party. Come into the party. So when you pray, it begins with our Father who is in heaven. And Jesus wants us to say, Abba. The Spirit is giving to us, saying, Abba, that you don't have to worry about it. You can come with a rich, fearless prayer before God, knowing that He has brought you in completely and has grabbed a hold of you. This is Mark's story. I write all my sermons with my friend Mark, and he's got a 3-year-old. And that 3-year-old has started saying the most manipulative words that a 3-year-old can. Right? He'll reach up for something, he can't get it, and he'll go, help me, Daddy. Help me, Daddy. And Mark says, it warms his heart every time he says it. Right? And I think when we pray that same Our Father, it's that same sense that we have with God. That He wants us to come to Him as a son, as a daughter. Ladies, don't be neglected in that, all right? As a son and a daughter, that you are coming before God. So this is the beginning of the Lord's Prayer. And it'll be a fun ride, especially on that Give Us This Day Our Daily Bread, all right? So let's end right there.